Hello and welcome to our latest Tenant Pulse video. This is a recording of the slides and what we found in our latest voice on rent and affordability. This is the fourth annual Tenant Pulse we've done on rent and affordability, and I'm going to take you through an abridged version of what that survey found. So about Tenant Pulse, you're probably familiar, but Tenant Pulse is Wales's tenant voice platform led by TPAS Cymru, enables tenants to share their experiences, have their say anonymously as well. And we use those findings directly with Welsh Government and decision makers. And one of the reasons why I'm making this recording is we have a number of people who want to go back over the results in an abridged version. And I'd like to say thank you to Pobble, our sponsors. Our tenant voice work is so important. It helps pay for the costs of the platform and the analysis that we do. And before we start, there is a prize draw for tenants. It's really important. We want to thank people for taking part. And this time, Andy from Pembrokeshire and Eleri from Gwynedd. So congratulations to them. So what is this subject? It's rent and service charges. Welsh Government have been looking at this. They do a 5-year cycle on rent policy and how it works. And there's been a working group for quite a while. I've been involved in that working group looking at different models of rent. And also TPAS Cymru chaired a working group of tenants on the tenant engagement side. David Lloyd, TPAS Cymru chaired that. So there's been a consultation out over the summer, and during that period, we've provided tenants with a number of opportunities to get involved. This Tenant Pulse is one of them. We also ran our own Tenant Voice Cymru event, where tenants were able to talk straight to Welsh Government officials about their views on this subject. And we ran 2 face-to-face events with landlords, with their tenant groups, just to get their views as well. And all that went into our consultation response. And we are now waiting that consultation response. Lots of organisations. I've been to some briefings about what it said, and we're waiting for Welsh Government to come down now and decide on how rent will work for the next 5 to 10 years potentially. So we're going to cover some of those subjects today. So the other thing I was going to mention that we have an advisory group called TPAG. It's 120 tenants in social and private rental sector who advise us on our work and our pulse work. So they social housing tenants only, because this is only to do with social housing. They saw the survey before it went out. They commented on the questions, help us shape some of the questions and improve them. And then they've seen the results in advance afterwards to give their views and give us a bit more. Did that surprise them and get some more insight for us on that? So this is also part of our work here in the Tenant Voice in Wales. And apart from Tenant Pulse, our Tenant Voice Cymru events and tenant networks, we do a lot of online listening these days, looking in Reddit and Discord and different places of what tenants are talking about, Facebook groups, things like that, and our casework as well. And this all shapes part of that tenant voice into Welsh Government, into the Senedd, into decision makers, making sure tenant voice is at the heart of policy in Wales. So for this Tenant Pulse, how did we promote it? We sent it to our Tenant Pulse database across Wales. Also, landlords themselves forwarded it on their emails and their newsletters. They help publicise it. But we also want to get a more diverse voice. We want to get everyday renters in social housing, not just the active people. We want to get just everyday voices, people going about their lives. So we ran a campaign in Meta, which is Facebook and Instagram, and Reddit as well. I'm really pleased with some of the results that came out of that. I think we ran about 100,000 ads or so across Wales. And it really, you could see the difference and the style and diversity of the people who responded via those Meta and Reddit paid campaigns. Well worth it. So who responded? There was 554 qualified responses. There was more than that, but obviously we asked questions like, are you in social housing? And if you weren't, you were out. There's some qualification questions just to make sure the right people were responding. They're social housing tenants, because this is social housing policy. And it was across all ages, across all 4 regions. We track during it to see if all the regions are responding, and therefore do we need to put more weight into the advert campaigns, things like that. I'm really pleased with how it's split. So it was social housing between housing associations and local authorities, and all this was a 30% uplift on last year's response. So in terms of responses across the regions, I think I've already mentioned it was fairly well balanced, and I think that's good. You would expect South East Wales to be slightly higher than, say, North Wales, because there's a lot more social housing in South East Wales than there is, say, in North or Mid Wales. So I think those demographics reflect well, and we're pleased with that spread. So in terms of further insights, we also ask about different, whether it's minority ethnic, disabled, carers, things like that. And it's really important to get that, because we can filter on that and see those voices and make sure they are heard, see if there's any differences. And so you can see on there the graph is a number of people from minority ethnic, from disabled or sensory loss, LGBTQ plus. One thing I was going to mention this time was that other was a bit higher than we normally expect. It's normally less than 0.5%, and it's usually things people self-identify maybe with neurodiversity or dyslexia and don't view it as disability, and that's full respect to that. This time in the other, there was a number of people who were writing some. Best way to describe it is just Facebook stuff. It was very much in capital letters: white and British, the forgotten minority. Anti-Welsh language comments as well in there. There was a number of things in there. They're not meant to be in the underrepresented category. It's meant to look at those genuine underrepresented groups in Wales, but there's a percentage of people now who are using that category to make political points, and it's a real shame. And we've got to look at how all those voices are heard, but how we categorise that going forward. So across household income, I think that's really important. Again, it's one of the filters we look at is when people talk about rent and affordability and whether they can afford their service charges and is their home affordable, are they coming from universal credit or other welfare payments? Are they working or other salaried income, or retired? And I think that's really important for filtering. And we noticed a few things. Under 30s normally would be very, very high in working, but it had fallen quite a bit now in terms of now using more top-up payments and universal credit. Whether that's a different profile of people responded or whether that's a trend, that's something we need to look further at. And again, this number of people who are working and salaried income again was falling, it's a worrying trend. And I wonder, I say, whether it reflects just people surveying or not. But Tenant Pulse, it was showing that income types are changing, and I think and rent models need to think about that as well, as to how people are paying the rent, how the affordability of that. So we're going to go into now the details. That's what you want. But there was 2 things that really came across first we want to talk about, which was affordability. We asked people for a couple of years now about, is your rent affordable? And previously, most people said, yeah. It was 78% back in 2023, then fell to 62% in 2024, but still a sizable majority. And now this time around, only 42% tenants felt their rent is affordable. That's a worrying trend. That's gone from 78% to 42% saying it's affordable in 2 years. And that needs further look at, and we'll do that now. But equally, what does affordable mean? One of the things that's disappointed about this consultation is Welsh Government hasn't set an affordability matrix or an affordability model. And when we ask people, would you like to see an affordability model, something to landlords could work to, Welsh Government, tenants. Um, 93% of people said yes, they'd like to see an affordability model, and what affordable rent is, a definition of it, because every landlord has a very different interpretation of what is affordable rent. And again, the other thing we saw as well was this thing about younger people here. It says falling through the net in terms of comms and engagements. You'll see further on where things like younger people say, I didn't see those comms, but I'd like to know more. When you ask people about service charges, the youngest people, the people who ask the most, going, I'd like to know more about service charges. I'd like to know more about rent. As you get older, you're either not as bothered or you have more trust in your landlord. The older you got in this survey, the less likely to go, yeah, I'd like to know more about these sort of subjects. So younger people aren't seeing the comms and they want to see more detail. And that's a certain message that we take out of this as well. Sorry. So let's get into some detail. The tenant voice on landlord communications. So as I mentioned already, there's increased need for transparency on spending, where rent goes. So 56% of tenants didn't know where the rent was spent. I know you might put it in a magazine, you might put it in a previous email or at the AGM, but certainly, 50% is a sizable amount who go, I don't know where the rent has gone in terms of what landlord spends it on. There were some communication differences on age and region. I think I mentioned already, younger tenants, less engaged seeing those communications. And one of the things, this financial support and awareness is a key one. Over the last couple of years, the Minister has been very clear to this landlords and to the sector that they need to offer ways of getting help for those who are struggling. Because we know people have struggled during the crisis. And landlords have put a number of good stuff in place. And when we ask people about, have you seen that information about financial support being available, how you can get some advice and things like that, not enough people are seeing that. Only 41% said, yeah, I've seen my landlord talk about how I can get financial help or support or advice. And there was a sizable 45% going, no, but I'd like to know more. So that hasn't been as successful, I think, as maybe some of the landlords had hoped. Good people there, do good work, but I don't think it's reaching as well as it could at the moment. And if you look at some of the regions, probably the lowest region in terms of where maybe a bit more work's needed was Southwest Wales in terms of low awareness about rent and wanting more information. So the next one is about rent itself, the mechanics of it and how you could maybe do rent differently. So we tested the idea of what's called affordable warm rents, where maybe some people would pay a bit more rent if they had high EPC, i.e. they're probably going to have lower energy bills. So should they pay a bit more rent so that people who have high energy bills, do poor energy efficiency, maybe they then could pay a bit less. It didn't test well. We've noticed there's two ways of this now. When we test just in a survey, would you pay more rent for energy efficiency, and that means people are inefficient pay less. It never comes out well. In fact, this time it said 71% were against. Now there is a flip side to this. It doesn't mean to say warm rents don't get any support. When we actually do it in workshops, TPAS with tenant groups, and we talk through and see how it would work and things like that, the acceptance rate goes hugely up. And I think that's the difference between explaining, engaging, getting tenants involved in it versus cold questions in surveys. Cold question surveys, people are like, oh, I don't know if I trust that, I don't know. And people naturally go more risk averse and say, no, don't like that idea. So as I say, it's a pinch of salt, but on the evidence here, 71% against the sort of warm rent model that's been kicked around at the moment. Well, I would say the ministerial cap, if you're not familiar with the ministerial cap, it means that if inflation goes over CPI of 3%, the minister can intervene and cap that rent or set the rent on behalf of the sector. It's now very big, strong support from tenants. They very much wanted to see it, and we did ask them about what percentages, and they were still like, nope, keep it at 3%. So that was something I pressed back to Welsh Government on, which is, there is strong support and strong support for 3%. There are people in the sector, in landlord sector and representative bodies of landlords, who are pressing for that to be scrapped or to rise quite significantly. So the minister only gets involved if it's, say, over 5% and things like that. And says there, younger tenants and those in South West Wales were the most supportive. They wanted the trust that a minister could intervene and that rent just couldn't go whatever the landlord wanted to set it at. So that safety net was a word that came up quite a few times. And the length of standard, there was a consultation in questions asked about 5-year versus 10-year. Reality is it was split near 50-50 between 5 and 10. So you think, oh, well, it doesn't matter. Actually, when you read the comments in the 10-year one, they actually said, oh yeah, 10-year, but with a 5-year review or with regular reviews. So they weren't actually, half the people saying 5-year, and the ones who were saying 10-year, the other half, very much wanted reviews in between our equivalent break clauses in it. So I don't know, to me that leans itself more to a 5-year policy, but you can interpret it however you wish. There's more detail in the report. So tenants' voice on service charges. The first thing coming out of that is, 46% of tenants consider service charges affordable. Great. 29%, as in, 3 out of 10 people say they're not affordable, and 24% just weren't sure. I read quite a little bit about the unsure comments, because what they were saying was, I struggle with service charges, but I don't know if that's, if it's affordable. I don't know if it's right. I don't know if that's fair and value. I don't know if it's value for money. But as I say, so there's only about half, under half now who say service charges are affordable. And yes, there were variations in there. More if you were in a housing association, if you were 31 to 45, things like that. But what came out of it was, I think, in the comments section was. Tenants report feeling service charges are high relative to service charges, and did they understand it? And we did ask actually, in that, do you understand how the service charge is? Would you like to know information? And we also put, do not care? I didn't say those words, but no, I'm fine. No, I don't need to know about how it works. Actually, it was less than 10% of people who went, no, I just don't need to know. So only 31% understood how service charges are calculated, and there was a big over 50% saying, I would like to know more. I'd like to know more about how it works, how it's calculated, how the charges are done, things like that. So I think there's still a big gap there around service charge transparency. Sorry, next slide. And affordability. I've mentioned already this perception that tenants saying my rent is affordable has massively dropped now. It's halved over 2 years. And again, it was in that younger working incomes. They're the ones who are struggling more. The other thing also we asked them about was this model about CPI plus 1%. If you're not familiar with what that means, CPI is a measure of inflation. There's a couple of measures, but consumer price index is the one mainly used for, certainly used in this sector, for their measure of inflation. So if inflation's at 2%, the model previously said the landlord could put it up by 2% plus 1, 3%. If inflation was 1%, it would be 1% plus 1, 2%. You get the idea. CPI plus 1 was the model. And we tested the number of things on there. And there was quite a lot of opposition to CPI plus 1%. I don't think that's unreasonable. I don't think it's unnatural from tenants, because you're asking them, do you sign up to above inflation rises year on year? And as you imagine, 55% said, no, I'd like to see rent going below inflation, particularly local authority tenants there. I don't think that's unreasonable. I think, no, it's unlikely people go, no, I want inflation, above inflation rises every year. I think that goes back to that transparency and landlords having to work better and work harder to explain where the rent goes, what value for money, how they're using that above inflation to do better repairs, to improve their homes, things like that. You can't ask tenants just to sign up to above inflation rises unless you put the work in and get them bought into it. No big surprise there. And I mentioned already the need for an affordability framework. It was so high across all different types, whether and wherever you lived in Wales, whatever age group, whether you underrepresented group, everybody said wanted a model of affordability. Some landlords have them, but there needs to be a Wales approach to this. So 5 reasons why tenants told us they struggle with affordability. I don't think any of these are going to be rocket science to you or massive surprises, but here it is. And it was quite clear in their comments, and let's say over 550 responses. They feel their rent is either too high compared to their income. Yeah. Tenants report and experience rising costs. So it may not just be their wages, but other living costs, council tax, utilities, service charges, everything feels like it's rising, and that's squeezing tenants. Tenants experiencing poor value for money. The word, as I mentioned earlier, service charges. Comments like, I don't really know. I don't know whether I'm getting value for money because I don't really know if that's the right rent. Some landlords compare their rents to the private sector in their area. I'm not totally convinced on that. But it's a way of showing, well, actually you're getting really good value for money compared to rents in the private sector. I think there needs to be more value for money comparing your rent against other landlords and seeing what you're getting for that. Lack of clarity as well, feel unclear what service charges are covering, not sure why their rent's going up, what's it paying for, they haven't seen any improvements on their homes. A lot of comments about they seem to have plenty of money to build new homes but not repair my home. Again, you can understand that frustration. And also, when we talked about affordability models and rent affordability, a lot of people are saying household circumstances should factor in that. Not one size fits all. That's a difficult challenge. If that means depends on rent should be on what they earn in that home. It's a complicated subject that, and I get it. People were saying rent should factor in the home that I live in my individual circumstances. What the results mean for housing in Wales, I think, hopefully you're thinking the same thing as me. There is a trust gap at the moment. Landlords need to engage better on some of these things about rent transparency, about service charges, and reaching the right audience. It's not enough just to go, well, we put it in the newsletter or we stuck it in the annual report or something. Targeting younger people. They're not seeing the comms that you're putting out as well as they should be. So certainly for landlords, trust work, transparency, reaching, thinking about the communications, how they reach tenants, engage them. For policymakers, I think certainly they want those protections. That ministerial cap at 3%, the intervention rate, very much want to see that. They want to understand affordability frameworks. They want to trust somebody to look at the evidence and work out what is affordable, because there is an affordability crisis there. And certainly for the wider sector, I think it says there, engaging younger people, work in homes. They're the people who are saying we're not seeing the stuff, or they're the people who want more information. And I think there's an opportunity there for tenants to be involved in that and helping improve that section. And I say for all these different parties, tenants, landlords, policymakers, collaboration, co-production, designing services and rent policy service charges together. So recommendation of the next steps. Maybe I think some of these have points been already made, but be clear how rent is spent. Yeah. Engage all ages, especially younger tenants. Make financial support easier to find. We know landlords out there, they're probably going, yeah, well, you've got really good service. I know you have. But you're not maybe reaching everybody who knows about it, who needs it. So that's my message on that. Make the financial support easier to find. In terms of rent, consider rent tenant preferences. Like I say, if we can't force. It's quite clear to me. I like the warm rent models. I can see the evidence behind it, but it can't be forced on people. People just going, nope, don't get that. So, involving tenants, understanding, should rents be factored on area, communication, I think we've already mentioned, and that protection for tenants, they very much want to see that kept. So that's a message to Welsh Government. Service charges, yeah, this is no new here. We've been kicking around this subject for many years. Clarity of service charges, value for money of the service charges. What are they getting for it? Are they seeing it? Do they understand? And targeted support again, for those who are finding service charges challenging, because there are some interesting service charges now for certain buildings, And recommendation on affordability. A framework, I already said. What is definition of affordability? What models are credible, and how could landlords use them? Review of the event increase policy. I can't see how we can keep going CPI plus 1, CPI plus 1.5 consistently for years on. It just, we're making rent more unaffordable year on year, unless you're at the same time reducing their energy bills, or reducing some other bill that they have, or if they've got a telecom solution that means they don't have to have their own individual broadband or something like that. CPI plus 1, I don't think, so can stay like that forever. And rent policies need to consider those tenant concerns. And stability, we've mentioned already. I think that covers the same subject. So what did the sector say about this report? They were sent it in advance. Sage Cymru, I'm not going to read them all out. I think, what do they call it in videos? Pause to read, isn't it? If you're on Instagram and things like that. But very much Sage, Cymru saying thank you for tenants who have taken part in this research. Valuable insight. I know they've looked at it, they've read it, they've come back with some questions. And they value this, the time the tenants have given. Same as CHC, Community Housing Cymru, the landlord body. Again, I'm not going to read all this out, but they do value this. They do like it. There's somebody who's come back and they've got ideas maybe of working some things in the future with us as well. Again, they put that point about if you're a housing association tenant struggling, please contact your landlord. They have specialist teams there to help you. And Shelter Cymru, again, makes for worrying but unsurprising reading. This affordability bit plummeting, is a concern. Service charges, not being seeing the financial support that's available. Again, affordability needs to be at the heart of rent policy, and that's what we've got to find. What is genuinely affordable, and have those hard conversations. So appreciate that from Shelter Cymru. Here's our chair of Tenants, chair of TPAS Cymru, outlines the tenants across Wales are undergoing pressure with too many people saying the rent is no longer affordable. And I think Amanda, our vice chair and a tenant herself as well, gives tenants a voice. It's disheartening to see how badly the current financial situation certain tenants. It's not just about housing, it's the cost of living crisis. There's a number of pressures now on tenants, energy bills going up, council tax seems to go up way above inflation each year, and these are the sort of things where we need to look at. We want to keep their homes, rents that are affordable. It's a real challenge. So the next steps, I say we've already responded to the Welsh Government consultation. We've seen some of the results of that. Across the sector, all the people have responded, but we haven't seen now what's Welsh Government's decision. That's what we're waiting for. The report is on our website in full. It's about 50 pages long. There's also shorter exec summary as well, English and Welsh. We're also happy to be part of any follow-up events. We've been asked already, can you do something with that tenant group? Maybe talk through the findings and see how does that reflect with that landlord and that tenant group. How could they locally improve awareness of the financial support? How could they locally maybe reach younger people or do more on service transparency? We want to work with you, any tenant group, any landlord, to look at these findings, break them down and look at them. And we've also rent convergence. I haven't talked about it much in this, but the subject of rent convergence feels like the last remaining sticking point between influence on Welsh Government And so we're trying to get a video together now of what is rent convergence, what is the subject, to try and explain it, you know. But we are here to support you. We are here, however you want us to do next. So obviously, thank you to the tenants who took part in this. Thank you for giving your voices. They really do matter. And I know Welsh Government were itching to see this report. We gave them an advance copy without all the pretty pictures on the front because they really wanted it to be part of their thinking and their decision making. So thank you. It's all on our website. And I think that is it. If you do have any questions, please send them in. If you've got any thoughts or where we want to go next with this, say local stuff, please get in touch. So thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr. I hope you found this interesting. I'm going to work it out to stop this.